On the far side of the galaxy, there was a planet called Varus 9. It had once been a bright and beautiful world, full of life and laughter. 2 golden suns warmed its skies, and vast oceans shimmered beneath floating cities of glass. The Varians, the people of that world, were gentle and wise. They believed their world would live forever. But forever does not always mean safe. It began slowly, so slowly that no one noticed at first. The suns grew dimmer with each passing year. At first, scientists said it was just a natural cycle. Then crops began to fail. The sea plants that produced most of their food started dying. Animals vanished from the forests. Storms became violent and unpredictable. What once were calm blue skies turned red and full of dust. The Varians looked up and realized their world was dying, and they had no idea how to stop it. The twin suns, their source of warmth and energy, were collapsing much faster than predicted. Their scientists worked day and night trying to find a solution. But Varus 9 was too far from any major trade route, too distant from other civilizations to expect quick help. For years, their leaders sent small requests for aid to nearby colonies and scientific federations. No one answered. The galaxy was vast, and Varus 9 was just one small voice lost in the endless stars. As the temperatures dropped and cities started to lose power, people began to panic. Families huddled together in underground shelters. Crops froze before they could be harvested. Oceans began to shrink, leaving behind salt-covered plains. The once lively capital city, Lurien, grew silent except for the wind howling through broken towers. In their desperation, the Varian Council gathered in a great meeting hall beneath the capital. It was once used for music and celebrations, but now it was filled with frightened officials, scientists, and survivors. Their leader, Chancellor Davin, stood before them. His once bright eyes looked hollow. His voice cracked from exhaustion. "We have sent calls for help to every system within range," he said quietly. "No one is coming." The room fell silent. Many wept quietly. They had believed the galaxy was kind, that in their time of need someone would come. But one young scientist, a woman named Selani, refused to give up. She had been working on an experimental long-range beacon, a device that could send a distress signal beyond the nearby systems, possibly across the galaxy. It required more power than they had, and using it would drain one of their last remaining reactors. But she stood up and said, "If we do nothing, we die in the dark. If we try, at least the stars will hear us." Her words sparked something in the room, a faint flicker of hope. They agreed. That night, Selani and a small team of engineers worked in the freezing wind to set up the beacon on the highest peak near the capital. The mountain once glowed with bioluminescent flowers, but now it was covered in ash and ice. They connected the reactor cables, their hands trembling from the cold. As lightning flashed around them, they activated the beacon. A deep hum filled the air, followed by a burst of light that shot upward through the stormy sky. The signal carried their message, a plea written in every known galactic language. "To any who can hear this, we are the people of Varus 9. Our world is dying. We need help, food, water, shelter. We beg for aid before it is too late." The signal was sent again and again, pulsing through the void, crossing light years of empty space. After the beacon was activated, the people waited. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing came. The skies grew darker, and the temperature fell further. The Varians watched the horizon, praying for lights in the sky that might mean ships were coming. None appeared. The scientists monitored the beacon's transmissions, but eventually the power began to fail. They had used everything they had left. Selani would sit by the transmitter every night listening to the static. Sometimes she thought she heard something faint within the noise, a whisper, a pattern, but it was never clear enough to understand. She would write in her notes, still no reply. Her hands shook as she wrote it for the last time. Chancellor Davin visited her one evening. "You did all you could," he said softly. "Perhaps it is time to rest." Selani looked at the stars through the observation window. The sky no longer had the warm glow of 2 suns. It was cold and pale, filled with sharp white stars. "I can't stop wondering," she whispered. "What if someone heard us? What if they're just far away?" Davin didn't answer. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder and walked away. Weeks turned into months. Entire regions of Varus 9 became uninhabitable. Shelters were overcrowded and disease began to spread among the weakened survivors. Food was rationed to a single meal a day. Yet, even as hope faded, some still climbed the mountains at night to watch the beacon glow faintly. It had become more than a machine. It was a symbol, the last sign that they had not given up completely. Children were told stories that one day someone out there in the stars would hear their call. Maybe the builders will come, the elders would say. Maybe the silver ones, maybe even the Deathworlders, if they truly exist. The Deathworlders were more myth than reality to most Varians. Creatures said to come from a planet so dangerous that everything there fought to survive. The tales painted them as fierce, impossible beings who could live through anything. But even those stories had faded into legend like fairy tales told before sleep. Then one morning, the beacon went silent. Its final pulse flickered weakly, then died. The engineers tried to restart it, but the reactor core had completely burned out. The mountain was dark once more. For the people of Varus 9, that moment felt like the end. They had called to the galaxy, and the galaxy had turned away. Solani stood on the frozen ridge and looked up at the empty sky. Her breath fogged in the freezing air. Maybe, she murmured, and the stars never listen. Behind her, the capital lay in ruins. The towers that once sparkled like glass were buried under layers of snow and ash. She turned to walk back, feeling the crushing weight of silence all around her. But deep in space, far beyond what the Varians could see, something did stir. The signal hadn't vanished into nothing. It had traveled across countless light years, bouncing off dead satellites and forgotten relays until it reached a small, blue planet orbiting a single yellow sun. There, among the networks of listening stations and deep space scanners, the message from Varus 9 was finally received, but the Varians didn't know that yet. On their dying world, they continued to survive day by day, holding on to hope that felt thinner than air. In their shelters, they told each other that maybe, just maybe, the stars were taking time to decide who should answer. Far above them, their faded beacon light still drifted faintly across the void, like a lonely candle in a sea of darkness. They had done what they could. They had sent their SOS to the stars. Now all they could do was wait. What they didn't know was that, out there in the dark, the first to hear their cry were not diplomats, not peaceful traders, and not the powerful galactic federations they had prayed to. The ones who heard it first were the Deathworlders, humans. And the moment they decoded that desperate signal, they didn't hesitate. They began to move. Light years away from Varus 9, in a quiet corner of space, a Terran patrol ship drifted above a mining colony on the edge of human territory. It was an ordinary day. The crew of the ship, called Dauntless, was going through routine scans of nearby asteroid fields when a faint, broken signal appeared on their communication screen. At first, everyone thought it was interference from the nearby gas clouds. The sound was mostly static, but every few seconds a pattern repeated, soft, rhythmic, and almost pleading. The communications officer, Lieutenant Harper, frowned and leaned closer. "Commander, you might want to hear this," she said, her fingers adjusting the filters. Static cleared for a moment, and through the noise a few strange melodic words came through. It wasn't Terran Standard. It wasn't any common trade dialect either. Commander Ellis Ward walked over. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, known for staying calm under pressure. He listened closely. The sound was weak, but there was no mistaking it, a distress call. "Record it," he ordered. "Let's see what we've got." Over the next few hours, the crew worked to clean up the signal. The ship's AI translated parts of it, and finally the message became clear. "This is Varus 9. Our sons are dying. We need help. Please respond." The bridge went silent. The voice sounded tired and desperate, like someone who had lost all hope but was still trying one last time. "Varus 9? Harper repeated. Never heard of it. She searched through the galactic map. It was a small, isolated system far beyond the main Federation routes, so far that most ships never traveled near it. Ellis stared at the coordinates. "That's outside Federation jurisdiction," he said slowly. "Practically forgotten space." Lieutenant Harper hesitated. "Sir, should we forward this to Terran Command?" "Immediately," Ellis replied. "And mark it as high priority." The Terrans had earned a reputation across the galaxy, both admired and feared. Other species called them Deathworlders, a name that came from their home planet, Earth, a world of raging storms, predatory animals, and diseases that could kill in hours. To most alien civilizations, humans were seen as dangerous, too aggressive to trust. But to those who truly knew them, humanity's toughness wasn't born from cruelty. It came from surviving a planet that tested them every single day. Within hours, the signal was forwarded to Terran Central Command. Normally, such a message would take days to pass through bureaucracy. But this one was different. The data showed the dying state of Varus 9's twin suns and the rapidly collapsing ecosystem. It wasn't a small emergency. It was a world on the edge of extinction. The message reached Admiral Riker, who was overseeing humanitarian operations in nearby sectors. When he heard it, he didn't hesitate. "Prepare a relief fleet," he ordered. "Medical ships, engineering vessels, and planetary support teams. Get them moving now," some of his officers protested. "Admiral, with respect, that's outside our jurisdiction." "The Federation hasn't approved," Riker interrupted, his voice firm. "I don't care who approves it. Someone called for help. That's all I need to know." Back on the Dauntless, Ellis received the orders. The Terran fleet was to be the first to investigate. Humanity had recently come out of its own series of brutal wars and was still rebuilding many of its colonies. Resources were tight and morale was fragile. But none of that mattered now. Within a day, the Dauntless and 4 other ships joined a convoy of medical cruisers and engineering craft. The mission was simple but dangerous: reach Varus 9, assess the situation, and provide whatever aid was possible. The fleet included volunteers, doctors, scientists, and even soldiers who wanted to do something good for once. Some of them had fought in wars and were tired of destruction. This was their chance to save lives instead of taking them. As the ships prepared for jump, the crew gathered in the briefing room. The holographic image of Varus 9 flickered in the air, showing a pale world surrounded by 2 dying suns. Ellis stood in front of it. "We don't know what's waiting for us," he began. "The planet's environment may be unstable. Radiation, storms, famine, you name it. And we don't even know if they're still alive down there. But that doesn't matter. They sent a call for help. And we're going to answer it." The crew nodded quietly. Some looked nervous, others determined. For all their strength and toughness, humans were emotional beings. They remembered what it was like when no one came to help them in their darkest hours. That memory was burned deep in their history. When the countdown began, the hum of the engines filled the air. The fleet entered FTL space, a silent leap through the dark. The stars stretched into thin lines and the ships vanished into the void. During the long journey, the crew of the Dauntless spent hours listening to the recovered parts of the Varian transmission. It was haunting. There were moments where you could hear wind, thunder, and voices crying in the background. Some recordings sounded like prayers. Others were just static, broken by faint sobs. Lieutenant Harper played the message one night in the mess hall. The crew sat in silence. "They must have known no one would hear them," one engineer whispered. "Can you imagine sending that message into nothing?" Ellis didn't answer. He just stared out the viewport, watching the stars slip past like streams of light. After nearly a week in FTL, the fleet approached the coordinates of Varus 9. From the moment they dropped out of hyperspace, the scanners began to scream with warnings. The planet was surrounded by massive radiation storms. Clouds of ash swirled through the atmosphere, blocking most signals. Ellis looked at the planet through the viewing window. It was breathtaking and terrifying. One sun had already dimmed to a dull orange, while the other flickered weakly. The surface below was dark and broken, covered in thick layers of storm clouds. It looked less like a world and more like a dying ember. "Scan for life signs," Ellis ordered. The sensors struggled to read through the interference. After several tense minutes, Harper reported, "I'm getting faint signals from the southern continent, possibly underground structures. Could be survivors." The crew let out a quiet sigh of relief. There was still life down there. "Prepare the landing teams," Ellis said. "We're going down." The atmosphere was unstable, so smaller ships, shuttles, and dropships had to be used for descent. Pilots wore reinforced suits and oxygen masks. The moment they entered the clouds, lightning began to flash around them, shaking the ships violently. As the first shuttle broke through the storm layer, the surface of Varus 9 came into view. What they saw made even the hardened Terran soldiers fall silent. Cities lay in ruins, their spires half buried under ash and ice. Rivers had turned into black scars across the landscape. Yet through the destruction, faint lights flickered, signs of life struggling to hold on. When they landed near one of the underground shelters, the scanners picked up hundreds of weak life signs below. Ellis led the first team out of the shuttle. The wind was icy, carrying dust that burned the skin. The terrain was harsh, filled with cracks and debris from collapsed buildings. They found a large metal door half buried in the ground. It was sealed with strange alien symbols etched on it. Ellis approached slowly, then tapped his communicator. "This is Commander Ellis Ward of the Terran Fleet. We received your distress signal. We're here to help." For a long moment, there was no answer. Then the door creaked open slightly, releasing a gust of warm, stale air. From the shadows, a few thin figures appeared, Varians. Their skin was pale blue, their eyes large and full of fear. They stared at the humans, trembling. One of them spoke in a weak voice. "You came?" Ellis removed his helmet, even though the air was toxic. He wanted them to see his face, to see that he meant no harm. "Yes," he said simply. "We heard your call, and we came." The Varians looked at each other, disbelief on their faces. For months, they had waited in silence, thinking no one had heard them. Now standing before them were the Deathworlders, the species they had only known through terrifying stories. Yet these beings were offering help, not harm. Ellis smiled faintly. "Let's get your people out of here." And with that, humanity, the so-called Deathworlders, stepped forward into the dying world, ready to do what no one else in the galaxy had dared to do. Save strangers who had cried out into the dark, believing no one would ever answer. When the Terran fleet entered the orbit of Varus 9, the world below looked like a dying ember, glowing faintly under stormy skies. The sensors showed violent weather patterns, radiation leaks, and entire cities buried under ice and ash. Commander Ellis Ward stood at the observation window, watching lightning flash across the surface. He had seen war-torn worlds before, but this felt different. This was not destruction caused by war or greed. This was nature itself turning against life. The landing operation began at dawn according to local time. The sky was covered in thick black clouds, and the twin suns shone weakly through them. The Terrans used small shuttles to descend, because the air was too unstable for large ships. As the shuttles entered the atmosphere, turbulence shook them violently. Winds screamed past, and bolts of blue lightning danced around the hull. Inside one of those shuttles, Ellis sat quietly, his hand gripping the seat rail. He looked around at his crew, doctors, engineers, and soldiers. Their faces were tense, but their eyes were steady. Every one of them knew this mission might cost them their lives. When the shuttle finally broke through the storm, the surface appeared below. What they saw made everyone fall silent. The once beautiful cities were now broken skeletons. Towers had fallen, roads were cracked, and rivers were dry. Fires burned weakly in the distance where gas pockets ignited under lightning. Yet through the destruction, faint energy readings appeared on their scanners, underground shelters. There were survivors. The shuttle landed on a ridge overlooking the ruins of a large city. The air was thick with dust and toxic gases, so everyone wore breathing masks and suits. The ground crunched under their boots as they stepped outside. The wind carried the smell of burnt metal and ozone. Ellis could see the remains of alien technology. Machines once meant to sustain life now covered in ash. "Life signs below," said Lieutenant Harper through the comm. "About 200 meters underground. Probably a main shelter." "All right," Ellis replied. "Let's go meet them." They followed a narrow path that led to what looked like a sealed bunker entrance. The door was large and made of strange alloy, scorched by fire. Ellis walked closer and tapped it with his glove. It echoed hollowly. "This is Commander Ellis Ward of the Terran Fleet," he called out through his translator. "We received your distress call. We're here to help." For several long seconds there was only silence. Then faintly the sound of movement came from inside. The door groaned, gears grinding, and slowly began to open. Warm, stale air rushed out, followed by a group of thin, pale figures. They were Varians, tall, graceful beings with delicate features, their eyes wide and luminous even in the dim light. Their clothes were torn, their faces marked with exhaustion. The moment they saw the humans in heavy armor and dark suits, they froze. Terror spread through them. One Varian stumbled back, whispering something Ellis couldn't understand. The translator struggled, then caught a few words. "Deathworlders." "Demons." Ellis lifted his helmet's visor, showing his face. The toxic air stung his skin immediately, but he ignored it. "We're not here to hurt you," he said gently. "We heard your call for help." The Varians stared in disbelief. To them, humans were creatures of legend, said to come from a planet so dangerous that even the ground could kill. The stories called them beasts that thrived in poison, ice, and fire. And now those same beings stood before them offering help. A trembling Varian elder stepped forward. His voice was weak but filled with curiosity. "You answered?" None of the others came. We sent the call so long ago. Ellis nodded. We know. It took time for your signal to reach us, but we came as fast as we could. The elder's eyes glistened with tears. He turned to the people behind him and said something in his language. The fear on their faces softened into cautious hope. One by one, they stepped forward, bowing their heads slightly in gratitude. Inside the shelter, the Terrans saw the true cost of the planet's collapse. Hundreds of Varians huddled together in narrow tunnels. Children lay weakly beside their parents. The air was thin, the temperature low. Their food supplies were nearly gone. The lights flickered, powered by failing batteries. It smelled of damp metal and despair. Dr. Marin, the fleet's chief medic, immediately set up a medical station. She moved among the Varians, checking their vitals, treating infections, and distributing nutrient packs. The Varians watched in silence as the humans worked tirelessly. They expected cruelty, but found kindness instead. Ellis helped carry a group of injured to the main chamber. One of them, a young Varian woman, tried to speak. Her voice was hoarse. "Why would you come?" "We are strangers to you." The others turned away. Ellis looked at her with tired eyes. "Because once we were the ones who called for help," he said softly. "And someone answered us. We don't forget things like that." As hours passed, the Terran engineers restored power to the shelter's main systems. The lights came fully on for the first time in months. A faint warmth spread through the air as heaters came online. The Varians looked around, amazed. Children reached out to touch the glowing panels, laughing for the first time in a long while. Outside, the storm raged, but the humans continued their work. Massive cargo drones descended from orbit carrying supplies, food, water filters, oxygen tanks, and medical pods. The Terrans established a camp above ground despite the harsh weather. They built energy shields to block radiation and began constructing temporary housing units. In the following days, more Varian shelters were discovered across the region. The Terrans spread out in teams, moving through crumbling tunnels and storm-battered landscapes to find survivors. Many missions were dangerous. One rescue team nearly lost its shuttle when a lightning strike hit their hull. Another group had to dig through debris to reach a collapsed shelter. Everywhere they went, the Varians reacted the same way. First fear, then awe. They couldn't understand how creatures from a death world could risk so much to save others. Some whispered that the Deathworlders must have been sent by the stars themselves. Ellis stayed in constant communication with the fleet in orbit. He barely slept, spending nights checking maps and planning new rescue routes. Sometimes he would walk outside alone, staring up at the dark sky. The twin suns looked dim and cold. "Hang on," he would whisper as if speaking to the planet itself. "We're not done yet." One evening, while distributing food to survivors, Ellis noticed a small Varian child staring at him curiously. The boy reached out to touch his armored hand. Ellis smiled and removed his glove, letting the boy feel his rough, scarred skin. The child's eyes widened in surprise. "You're warm," he said in a shaky voice. "Yeah," Ellis replied, smiling faintly. "Humans are like that. We carry warmth where we go." Word spread quickly among the Varians about the Deathworlder commander who took off his helmet in toxic air and dug through rubble with his bare hands. To them, it was unthinkable bravery. To Ellis, it was simply the right thing to do. In time, the fear that once filled the Varians began to fade. They started to help the humans with repairs, learning from their tools and machines. They shared what little knowledge they had left about their world's systems. The bond between the two species grew stronger each day, but it wasn't easy. The storms worsened. Radiation leaks spread. Some shelters collapsed entirely before rescue teams could reach them. Every success came with a cost. A few Terran soldiers died when a tunnel caved in during a rescue mission. Instead of leaving their fallen behind, the humans buried them beside the Varians they had tried to save, marking the graves with both human and Varian symbols. One night, during a rare calm, Ellis sat with the Varian elder near a small heater. The elder looked at him thoughtfully. "Your people are strong," he said quietly. "But not just in body, in spirit too. You fight against death as if it offends you." Ellis chuckled softly. "On our world, death tried to take us every day. We just learned to fight back." The elder smiled faintly. Then perhaps the stars sent the right ones. Above them, the storm clouds parted for a brief moment, revealing a sky full of stars. For the first time in years, the Varians saw the lights beyond their world. Among them, the Terran fleet glowed faintly, watching over the planet like a ring of guardians. The Varians no longer saw monsters when they looked at the Deathworlders. They saw saviors, creatures forged in struggle who carried compassion as fiercely as they carried strength. And deep in the heart of Varus 9, where hope had almost died, it flickered again, burning bright against the darkness. The rescue mission on Varus 9 had turned into a fight against time. The planet was breaking apart faster than anyone expected. The Terran fleet, led by Commander Ellis Ward, worked day and night to save as many lives as they could. The storms grew worse, the ground shook from deep quakes, and the air was filled with ash and static. Every day felt like a battle for survival. The humans had already established several camps across the surface, each serving as a rescue hub. From orbit, massive cargo ships dropped supplies, medical kits, food crates, power cells, and building equipment. The Terran engineers built large dome shelters using portable shield generators to keep out the radiation and storms. Inside those domes, Varians and humans worked side by side, something no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. Still, the situation was desperate. Entire regions of the planet had become uninhabitable. Some Varian cities sank into the ground as tectonic plates shifted beneath them. The fleet's scientists calculated that within months, Varus 9's surface might become completely unstable. If they didn't act fast, millions would die. Ellis didn't rest. He moved between sites personally, helping wherever he could. He wasn't the kind of commander who stayed safe in orbit. He believed in being on the ground, shoulder to shoulder with his people. His face was constantly streaked with dust, his voice rough from the toxic air, and his armor scratched from debris. At one rescue site near the ruins of the old capital, a massive explosion tore through an underground power plant. The blast destroyed several shelters and trapped dozens of Varians under burning debris. Ellis was there when it happened. The shockwave threw him to the ground, and before he could stand, he heard the screams echoing through the rubble. "Get the rescue teams," he shouted. "Now!" The humans rushed in without hesitation. The air was thick with smoke and heat. Flames danced along the broken metal, and parts of the structure creaked dangerously. The Varians stood outside, terrified to go in. The temperature was unbearable for their fragile bodies. But the Deathworlders didn't stop. They grabbed metal bars, lifted heavy blocks, and crawled through narrow gaps to reach the survivors. Ellis pushed his way inside, ignoring the pain in his leg from a falling beam. He could barely see through the smoke. His visor cracked, but he kept moving, shouting names through his communicator. "I've got movement here," one soldier yelled. Together they lifted a collapsed wall and found 3 Varians alive but pinned. "Stay still," Ellis said, pulling them out one by one. The metal burned his gloves, but he didn't care. When one of the Varians tried to protest, saying he was too injured to be saved, Ellis simply said, "No one dies here today. Not if I can stop it." By the time they got the last survivor out, the entire structure was ready to collapse. Ellis ordered everyone to retreat, but as he turned to leave, he heard a faint cry, a child's voice from deeper inside. Without thinking, he went back. The others shouted for him to stop, but he ignored them. Inside, amid fire and falling debris, he found a small Varian boy trapped under a metal frame. Ellis lifted it with both arms, muscles trembling from the effort. He grabbed the child and ran out just as the floor gave way behind him. Outside, the Varians watched as the humans stumbled from the smoke carrying survivors in their arms. The sight was something they would never forget. When the Varian elder saw Ellis carrying the child, his eyes filled with tears. "You risked your life for him," he whispered. "Why?" Ellis, breathing heavily, set the boy down gently and said, "Because someone has to." That night, the surviving Varians gathered near the campfires, watching the Terrans repair damaged shelters. For the first time, they saw the humans not as monsters from a harsh world, but as beings of courage and compassion. Word spread quickly. Stories of Deathworlders who walked through fire to save the weak, who shared their food even when supplies were running low. Meanwhile, the Terran scientists were racing to stabilize the planet's environment. They deployed atmospheric stabilizers, massive machines designed to filter toxic gases and rebalance air pressure. Orbital reflectors were placed above the planet to shield it from harmful solar radiation. It was an enormous effort, but little by little it began to work. The storms weakened slightly and patches of blue sky started to appear between the clouds. The Varians came out from their shelters to see sunlight again, though it was pale and faint. For many, it was the first real sunlight they had seen in years. Some wept openly, kneeling on the ground as the warm light touched their faces. Even as progress was made, danger was never far. On one mission to install new stabilizers in the northern region, Ellis and his crew faced another disaster. A sudden magnetic storm caused their transport ship to lose control and crash into a canyon. The impact injured several crew members, and communication with the main fleet was lost. The storm raged for hours, making rescue impossible. Ellis refused to wait. He led his team on foot through the canyon, carrying the wounded on stretchers. The temperature dropped below freezing, and the wind was sharp enough to cut through armor seals. At one point, one of his soldiers collapsed from exhaustion. Ellis crouched beside him, gave him his own water pack, and said, "You don't stop until I do, got it?" They finally reached an abandoned Varian outpost and used old equipment to power a distress beacon. By the next morning, a shuttle from the fleet located them. When they returned to camp, half the Varians lined up to greet them. One of the children Ellis had saved ran forward and hugged his leg, refusing to let go. That night, a Varian scientist named Solani approached Ellis. She had been one of the original builders of the SOS beacon that called the humans. Her voice trembled with emotion as she spoke. "When we sent that signal," she said, "we believed no one would hear us. We thought the galaxy had forgotten us. But you came, why?" Ellis looked at her quietly for a moment before answering. "Because someone once helped us when we were dying. We owe that debt to anyone who calls for help." Solani smiled sadly. "You mean the Deathworlders are not driven by conquest?" Ellis shook his head. "No, we fight to protect. That's what makes us who we are." Days turned into weeks, and the joint effort between humans and Varians grew stronger. They learned to communicate better, share tools, and coordinate repairs. Many Varians joined the humans in the rescue operations. Guided by Ellis's example, the fear that had once separated their species vanished. Now they were united by something far more powerful: hope. The turning point came when the main reactor in the capital finally stabilized. It restored power to several regions and provided enough energy to keep the planet alive for decades. The fleet cheered over the communication channels. For the first time since arriving, Ellis allowed himself a small smile. "We did it," he said softly. That evening, the Varians invited the humans to a gathering near the rebuilt Capitol Dome. It was a quiet, solemn moment. The Varians lit crystals that glowed faintly blue, and the humans added small Terran candles beside them. The two kinds of light merged, filling the air with warmth. The elder stepped forward and raised his hands. "When we called for help," he said, "the stars were silent. We believed no one would answer. But you came. You who come from the harshest of worlds, you gave us life again. For that, Varus 9 will never forget humanity." The humans stood silently, humbled. Ellis bowed his head. "We didn't come for thanks," he said softly. "We came because it was right." As the gathering ended, the clouds above parted completely for a brief moment. The twin suns shone together one last time, bathing the ruined world in golden light. The Varians looked up, tears shining in their eyes. For that short moment, their dying planet looked alive again. The fleet recorded the scene from orbit. Across the communication channels, soldiers and engineers paused their work to watch the glowing planet. No one spoke. They all felt the same thing. The mission had cost them dearly, but it had given something greater in return. Proof that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, compassion could still burn brighter than fear. And as the sun slowly faded again, the Deathworlders continued their work, not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was what humanity did best, to fight for life even on a dying world. Years later, Varus 9 looked completely different from the dying world it once was. The skies were clearer, the storms had calmed, and plants had started to grow again on the cracked soil. Life was slowly returning to the planet, thanks to the efforts of both the Varians and the humans who had once risked everything to save it. The great Terran fleet had long since left, but their legacy remained in every rebuilt city, every working generator, and every green patch of soil. In the capital, on a hill that overlooked the new settlement, a massive monument was built. It was made of two materials, half of it from Varian stone, dark and polished, and the other half from human steel, rough and shining. The two halves met in the middle, forming the shape of two hands clasping each other. On the base of the monument, there were words engraved in both Varian and English. The inscription read, They came not for conquest, but for compassion. People came from all over the planet to see it. Some came to honor their loved ones who were lost in the disaster. Others came to remember the strangers from Earth who had crossed the stars to save them. It became a sacred place, a symbol of hope, unity, and the strength that comes from kindness. Children would often play near it, touching the hands and asking their parents, "Is it true? Did humans really come from another world to help us?" And the parents would smile and say, "Yes, my child. They came when no one else did." In the years that followed, the story of Varus 9 spread across the galaxy. Traders, travelers, and explorers carried the tale wherever they went. It became a legend, a story told in starports, schools, and colonies. People spoke of how a desperate SOS signal had traveled across space, ignored by many, until it reached a world called Earth. And the beings who answered that call were not diplomats or scientists. They were Deathworlders, the toughest, most dangerous species in the galaxy. Yet, they came not with weapons of destruction, but with hands ready to help. In time, this story reached worlds that had once feared humanity. Many alien species had believed humans were too violent, too unpredictable. They called Earth a death world because its environment was so harsh that only the strongest could survive there. But after hearing what happened on Varus 9, that image began to change. The galaxy started to see humanity not as destroyers but as protectors. Civilizations began reaching out, seeking alliances, hoping to learn from them. On Earth, the story of Varus 9 was told with pride. In schools, children learned about the Terran rescue fleet that saved an entire civilization. Museums displayed holograms of the mission, the damaged cities, the rescue camps, and the faces of the Varian survivors. Commander Ellis Ward's name was remembered as a hero, though he never claimed to be one. When asked years later why he risked so much for a species humanity barely knew, he only said, "Because when someone cries for help, you answer. That's what makes us human." Ellis eventually returned to Earth after decades of service. He had aged, his hair gray, his body marked with scars from countless missions, but his spirit remained strong. He lived quietly near a coastal town, often watching the night sky where Varus 9's star shimmered faintly in the distance. Sometimes he received messages from his Varian friends, short recordings filled with gratitude, news of progress and stories of how their children were growing up in a world reborn. One message came from Silani, the Varian scientist who had once helped build the SOS beacon. She now led Varus 9's new space research center. In her message, she said, "Commander, today our first ship left orbit, built with Terran technology. It carries your flag beside ours. Wherever it goes, we'll tell them what humanity did for us." Ellis listened silently, a faint smile crossing his face. "Good," he whispered to himself. "That's how it should be." Meanwhile, across the stars, the legacy of the Deathworlders continued to grow. More rescue missions followed in the years after Varus 9. When disasters struck on other worlds, floods, plagues, asteroid impacts, it was often the humans who arrived first. They had earned a new name among the stars, the Guardians of the Broken. To many, they were living proof that strength and kindness could exist together, but not everyone was pleased. There were still empires and warlords who feared humanity's rising influence. Some called their compassion a trick, a way to gain power through sympathy, yet even those voices could not silence the truth. The images from Varus 9 and of humans carrying alien children from burning ruins, of Deathworlders standing beneath alien suns to rebuild cities, spoke louder than any words. Years later, the Galactic Council officially recognized Varus 9 as a symbol of interspecies unity. Representatives from dozens of worlds gathered there for a ceremony under the Great Monument. The Varian elder who had once witnessed Ellis's bravery stood at the podium with trembling hands. His voice was old but strong as he spoke. "There was a time when we believed the stars were cold and empty, that no one would come to our aid. But when we called out, the Deathworlders came. They did not come for power. They came because they cared. And that, my friends, changed everything." As he spoke, holograms lit up the sky showing scenes from the rescue, the crumbling cities, the Terran ships descending, and the humans working side by side with Varians. When the hologram showed Ellis lifting the Varian child from the burning ruins, many in the crowd began to cry. The applause that followed lasted for minutes, echoing across the valley. Back on Earth, the event was broadcast live. Millions watched as the monument was lit with golden light, shining across the horizon. For the first time, humanity saw how far its compassion had reached. Children looked up at the stars that night and asked their parents, "Will we help again if someone calls?" And the parents answered, "Always." Celani later wrote a book about the entire event titled The Day the Stars Answered Back. In it, she described the moment the SOS signal reached Earth, the day the Terrans arrived, and how the Deathworlders saved her people. The book ended with these words: "The galaxy once feared humanity for its strength. Now it honors them for their heart." The book became a classic, translated into dozens of alien languages. As for Ellis, his story ended quietly. He passed away many years later, surrounded by family. On his desk, they found an old data crystal, a recording from the Varians showing the monument shining under twin suns. Someone had added a short message beneath it, for Ellis Ward, who came when no one else did. His family sent the message to Varus 9, and the Varians placed a small plaque beside the monument with his name engraved. Over time, Varus 9 became a place of pilgrimage for humans and aliens alike. Travelers from different worlds would visit the monument, leaving small tokens, medals, flowers, or even simple stones from their home planets. Each token carried the same message: gratitude. The monument became more than just a reminder of one rescue. It became a symbol of what the galaxy could be when compassion guided strength. In the centuries that followed, humanity's reputation as Deathworlders transformed completely. The word no longer meant dangerous or violent. Instead, it meant unyielding protectors. Whenever a crisis struck, and a distress beacon was sent across the stars, there was always one hope shared by every civilization, that somewhere, the humans would hear it, and every time an SOS was sent into the dark, someone would whisper, "Maybe the Deathworlders will come." Because even after generations passed, the lesson of Varus 9 remained unchanged. That humanity's greatest power was not its strength, not its weapons, not its technology, but its heart. They were born on a world that tried to kill them every day, yet they learned to fight not just for survival, but for others. And because of that, whenever the stars cried out for help, it was always humanity, the Deathworlders, and who answered first.